Would you believe a 58-year-old park ranger actually saved a Bigfoot? It's not a rumor. It's not a legend. He pulled the creature from the middle of Crystal Lake, and in return, his life was changed forever. In the late 1990s, deep inside Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Jack Rutherford, a 58-year-old ranger grieving the loss of his wife, thought he had seen it all. Until one summer sunset, he heard a cry for help echoing across Crystal Lake. He rushed his boat out, expecting a hiker in trouble. But what he found was Bigfoot, towering, intelligent, wild eyes filled with fear, yet strangely, unmistakably human. Jack didn't flinch. He pulled the creature to shore, and in return, his life changed forever. From the very next day, mysterious gifts began appearing on his doorstep. Glowing mushrooms, fire-warm river stones, herbs that healed wounds overnight. Jack felt younger, stronger, not alone anymore. You see, Bigfoot was never just one. There was a whole tribe, hidden deep within the woods. They had language carved into trees, families of their own. Even a mischievous Bigfoot child who liked to copy Jack's stance when he wasn't looking. But peace never lasts when humans get involved. A hunter named Ryan Briggs caught wind of the legend and vowed to capture one. For fame, for fortune, traps were laid. The forest trembled, and Jack was forced to choose: protect his own kind, or the forgotten kind that once saved him. When the Bigfoot child was taken, and the mighty father knelt before Jack, begging for help, the choice was clear. What happened next became legend. But here's the part no one tells you. 1 year later, after Jack lost his badge but kept his soul, the town's children began placing flowers on his porch. And when he returned to Crystal Lake one last time, the tribe came out, not in hiding, but standing proud. And the Bigfoot child, now older, handed him a carved piece of bark. Jack's image beside the forest, united as one. He passed quietly not long after. But the next morning, there was a gift on the porch. Because in their eyes, Jack never disappeared. He became part of the forest, part of the legend, part of the family. So tell me, my friend, where are you watching this from? What's your name so I can thank you properly for being here? And how far can this story go, if we share it together? If this touched something in you, tap like, subscribe, and let's build a community of Bigfoot believers and forest lovers around the world. From our forest to yours, sending you warmth, wonder, and wild stories. Always. The lake didn't speak much in late summer. It just shimmered, flat and glassy, with that amber hush that came when the sun gave up early behind the evergreens. Jack Rutherford stood alone on the southern ridge of Crystal Lake, boots planted in soil that had memorized him years ago. 28 years as a ranger. 12 years since the cancer took Evelyn. 3 since he last spoke more than 20 words to another human in a single day. He liked it this way. Quiet, predictable. No one called him Crazy Jack out here. No one scoffed at Evelyn's stories about the forest's laws. His hand adjusted the strap of his binoculars. Habit. This spot, every Thursday, just before sundown. His patrol route was a circle of ghosts, and he walked it like a ritual. Check the fire road, inspect the feeder trail, then rest a minute above the lake. That was all he allowed himself. Just a minute. But this evening, something snagged his breath. A sound, thin, splintered, almost human. He froze. The call didn't come from the trees. It came from the water. He lifted his binoculars, breath held, pulse slowed like muscle memory from years of search and rescue. Far off near the northern cove, where the water deepened into silence, a shape thrashed. Not the clean plunge of a deer or the clumsy panic of a bear. No, this was desperate. Arms, or something like them, flailing. A broad back matted with dark fur. A shoulder rolling under. Water frothed, then slowed, then stilled. Then a hand, massive, broke the surface again. Jack didn't think. He ran down the trail, cutting switchbacks, lungs burning. He hit the shoreline hard, boots sinking in cold mud. That thing was still out there, struggling, drowning. He yanked the rescue rope from his pack and threw it out. "Grab it!" he shouted, forgetting reason, forgetting species. The head turned, just for a second. Jack saw the eyes. Too human, too aware. Then it vanished again. He cursed under breath, stepped into the water, waist deep. The rope trailed. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just take it," he said, quieter this time, like talking to a wounded animal. A pause. Then, the rope jerked. Jack braced, dug his heels. The weight on the other end was immense. Every nerve screamed as he pulled, hand over hand, dragging it closer. For a second, the sun caught the creature's face, and Jack almost let go. Not from fear, from awe. It was real. It was impossible, and it was dying. The thing collapsed into the shallows, gasping, splayed half on land, chest heaving like a bellows. Soaked fur clung to thick limbs. Fingers, not paws, clutched the gravel. Jack backed up slowly, arms raised. No weapon, no threat. They stared at each other for what felt like hours. And then, the creature blinked. Just once. And in that blink was something Jack hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. No snarl, no retreat, just the silence of acknowledgement. Then it stood, wobbling, towering, easily 8.5 feet, maybe more. Muscles shifting like coiled branches, and in one smooth motion, it turned toward the trees. Disappeared. Gone. Jack stood there, dripping, shaking, waiting for his mind to catch up. Behind him, the gravel held footprints the size of dinner plates. Deep, clear, mud-caked and steaming under the last light of the sun. He didn't photograph them, didn't cast them, didn't speak of them. He just watched the ripples settle and let the forest close in around him again. That night, for the first time in over a decade, Jack Rutherford slept without waking. No dreams, no ghosts. Just quiet. Something had changed. The forest had answered, and somewhere, deep in the wild, he had spent his life protecting. Something was watching. Something that had decided, just for tonight, that a man could still be trusted. The drowning giant had made a choice, and so had Jack. The morning came slow, as if the forest itself wasn't ready to let go of the night. A thin ribbon of mist hovered above the ferns, curling between the trunks like breath that hadn't made up its mind yet. Jack Rutherford opened his eyes not to the beep of a clock or the bark of a ranger radio, but to silence. Real silence. That ancient, old-bone kind of quiet that felt earned. He sat up, blinking against the gold light spilling through the window of the old cabin. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just different. His body wasn't aching. That was the first thing. No fire in his knees. No familiar bark in his shoulders. He rolled his wrist. Nothing. He stood, without the usual wince, and crossed to the sink. The cold water ran clear from the tap fed by springline. He splashed his face and looked in the mirror. Not younger, not transformed, but steadier somehow, like something inside had been oiled. He stepped outside. Morning air crisp but not biting. The first rustle of birch leaves dropping into the season's shift. And on the wooden porch, laid out neatly as if by careful hands, a circle of gifts. His breath caught. 3 items placed deliberately. A cluster of glowing mushrooms, blue luminescent, softly pulsing like coals under moonlight. A strip of bark with sap still sticky to the touch, curled beside a perfect spiral of enormous feather, charcoal dark, longer than his forearm. No animal would arrange this. No wind would stack them this way. He knelt, hands hovering. This wasn't a prank. No kids dared come out this far. No hiker would trespass so deep in off-season. He touched the feather. Thick shaft. Warm at the base like it still held memory of movement. The mushroom smelled faintly of rain. The sap, Something stirred in his chest the moment he brushed it on an old scar along his knuckle, the one Evelyn used to trace when they sat on the porch after patrol, sharing coffee in silence. That night, the scar faded. Just gone. Jack didn't tell anyone. Of course not. Who would he tell? He just sat by the stove, journal open, eyes darting to the window every few minutes like a man waiting for a letter without a postmark. The next morning, it happened again. This time, the gifts were in the shape of a crescent, a dried sprig of moss, another thick feather, and a cluster of wild mint. There were no tracks, no animal prints, but there was presence, a sense of being watched. Not hunted, not judged, just seen. He didn't sleep much that night. The third day, he tried something. He found a red squirrel, injured, limping across the porch rail with one paw tucked up against its belly. Jack watched it struggle to leap from the wood post to the tree. It failed. Hit the ground hard, chirped in panic. He scooped it gently, brought it inside, laid it in a box with the same sap from the bark applied carefully around the paw. The thing twitched, struggled once, then stilled. He left it alone, unsure what he even hoped would happen. By dawn, the box was empty, the squirrel gone. The lid nudged open. On the porch, a stone polished smooth, shaped like an acorn, and beside it, a strip of bark with a single line carved through it. Not natural, intentional, marked. He held the bark in his hands for a long time. That night, wind swept hard through the treetops, making the cabin groan. Jack lit only one lantern, kept it low, and sat by the window. Somewhere past midnight, when the fire had died to a whisper and the wind had dropped, he heard it. A sound no animal makes. Not a growl, not a howl, a voice. Low, resonant, not speech, but something older. Like the echo of singing inside a cave. Like breath through stone. He stood, walked to the porch in socked feet. He didn't bring a flashlight. He didn't call out. He just listened. The sound wrapped through the trees like fog. Deep, lonesome. And in it, a pattern. Not melody. Message. It stopped as quickly as it came. The forest inhaled again. Jack didn't go back to bed. He just stood there, on his porch, hands still, eyes open. By morning, his boots were covered in dew and his breath came easier than it had in years. He felt younger wasn't the word. Alive, maybe. Present. The next day, he hiked further than usual. Not out of duty, but curiosity. He moved through the underbrush without effort, climbed a slope he used to avoid, then crossed the stream behind the southern glen. On the other side, he found a pattern of stones. Not random, not accidental. 3 small circles arranged in a triangle, each stone covered in lichen but carefully placed. In the center, a piece of bark with a notch carved at one edge. Jack crouched, ran a finger along the edges. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't meaningless. He left an offering that night, a small carving of his own, just initials, not his name, just the letters E and J, scratched into a piece of cedar and placed under the old sugar pine behind the cabin. He didn't expect an answer, but he got one. 3 nights later, the carving was gone. In its place, another feather, this one curled as if plucked mid-flight. Jack didn't speak to anyone, not that week, not the next. He wrote in his journal. He sharpened his hatchet even though it hadn't been used in weeks. He repaired the porch rail that had sagged. He waited, and the forest watched. There were no more grand gestures, just small things, bark left in patterns, stones turned upright, broken branches arranged in silent, thoughtful designs. And at night, when the wind paused, Jack would hear it again. That sound, that voice, calling not for help, not for danger, but for recognition. And when Jack stood still long enough, he didn't feel alone. Not anymore. He didn't know if the thing he'd pulled from the lake weeks ago was still nearby. But something was. Something aware. Something that remembered. He began to carry 2 journals, one for reports, one for what he couldn't report. In the second one, he wrote, "They're watching, not from fear, from thanks." He slept easier now, ate more, smiled sometimes without meaning to. Whatever had stepped out of the lake that night hadn't just left footprints. It had left a promise. And the forest, for the first time in years, felt like it was breathing with him, not around him. Something was healing. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just him. By late October, the forest had begun to whisper in heavier tones. The trees wore the last golds and rusts of the season, like old soldiers still trying to stand proud before winter swallowed the hills. Fog rolled in low each morning and lingered past noon, soaking into bark and bone, softening every footstep, every broken twig, every breath. The quiet wasn't absence. It was presence, thick and listening. Jack Rutherford had learned how to move through that quiet like it belonged to him. Or maybe like he belonged to it. There was a rhythm now to his steps, to the way he scanned the trails and tree lines, not as a ranger ticking boxes on a checklist, but as a man keeping promises. Every day since the lake, something new had met him. Strange offerings, imprints in moss, stones arranged like forgotten maps, and once a tuft of hair knotted around a cedar sprig, left on his porch like a benediction. He didn't question the how anymore, only the why. It was on a cold morning, 2 weeks before first snow, that he noticed the trap. He hadn't set it. It wasn't from Forest Service. Just an old-style spring snare tucked behind a downed log near the feeder trail north of Wallace Ridge. Crude, efficient, and snapped clean in half. The cable twisted and frayed. The mechanism pried apart with something stronger than pliers. Beside it, not footprints, because these things never left clean ones when you needed them, but 3 vertical claw marks dug deep into the trunk of a birch tree nearby. Not a bear's. No spacing for claws. This was a symbol. Straight, precise, deep enough to weep sap. 1 slash, then 2 below it. Almost like writing. He didn't move for a long time. Just stared, hand resting on the tree bark like it might speak. Later that day, following a routine trail west toward the bluff overlook, Jack slipped. His boot caught a loose rock, and the forest floor dropped out beneath him faster than he could curse. He tumbled, hard, into a shallow ravine carved by summer runoff. His ankle twisted, thigh slammed a boulder, breath knocked from him. Then he heard the snap, not from his leg, from his radio. The thing clipped to his belt shattered on impact, static fizzing out in a weak gasp. He tried to stand, cursed again, then realized his foot wouldn't hold weight. He was stuck, and the sky above the trees had started to dim. He yelled. Once, twice, his voice echoed back, pitiful and small. Then, silence. He dragged himself backward against the rock wall, sucked in air, tried not to panic. The cold was seeping fast through his jacket. He reached for the emergency flare, hesitated. Something in him said wait, so he waited. And then, from above the ravine, came the sound of leaves shifting. Not deer, not cougar. This was heavier, slower. He looked up and saw a hand. Not human, not exactly. It reached down, open, palm up. Fingers thick and long, covered in hair but not dirty, not savage. The nails dark but clean. And then, above the hand, just out of focus through the fog, eyes. Wide, watching, waiting. Jack didn't hesitate. He reached. The grip was strong. He barely felt his own feet touch the rocks as he was lifted, slowly, steadily, like being drawn up by a winch. When he stood, leaning hard on his good leg, the figure stepped back just enough for the mist to reclaim it. No words, no breath. Just those eyes. Jack nodded, hand pressed to his heart. The shadow nodded back, then vanished. 2 days later, while following a herd of mule deer through the East Valley, Jack noticed something impossible. The deer weren't avoiding the game trail. They were being steered. He watched from a ridge, binoculars up. The animals moved in a curved pattern, almost like a school of fish adjusting to invisible currents. Each time they neared the lower flats, where poachers had set bait in years past, they shifted course. Not panicked, coordinated, as if some unseen shepherd nudged them toward higher ground. Jack moved quietly to the lower trail, found the bait untouched, but beside it, fresh saplings snapped low and pointed outward, forming a loose barrier. Not enough to stop a deer, but just enough to redirect. Further up the slope, a branch snapped again. He turned fast, and there it was, a silhouette. Not the full creature, just a shape behind a split-trunk cedar. Broad shoulders, curved spine, tall, watching, and beside it, smaller, a second shape, shorter, closer to his own height. He stared. The smaller figure stepped out first, carefully, head cocked, limbs awkward like a fawn. Its fur was shorter, less matted, dark eyes wide, curious. It looked right at Jack, then mimicked him, tilted its head the same way, then stepped 1 foot forward, placed a hand against the tree, just like he had done days ago. Jack didn't breathe. The creature made no sound, just observed, mirrored. Then the taller shadow reached out, gently, firmly, and pulled the young one back into the trees. Gone again, like fog returning to water. Jack stood there for a long time, hand on chest. Later that night, back at the cabin, he lit no lamp, just let the fire flicker. Around midnight he heard it. 3 knocks, not random, not wind, deliberate, wood on wood. Knock, knock, knock. A warning, or a greeting. He didn't know, but his blood knew. He stepped outside. The trees were still, stars hidden behind thick sky. No eyes glowed, no shape moved, but the forest felt full, alive, and Jack, standing there in the cold, wasn't afraid. He didn't know what came next, but whatever it was, he wasn't watching from the outside anymore. He was being watched from within, and that changed everything. The first snow hadn't fallen yet, but the forest already moved like it had. Quiet, slow, watching its breath. The mornings came darker, the skies heavier. Ice clung to the tips of fir needles like warning bells waiting to ring. Somewhere deep beyond the ridge lines, something had shifted. Jack Rutherford felt it, not with his eyes or ears, but somewhere behind the ribs, where instinct lived. It started with tire tracks, old ones, maybe 2 days sunk into mud, coiling along a service road that hadn't seen a ranger's truck in years. They didn't belong to hikers. The tread was wrong. Wider, meatier, modified suspension. He crouched near a print by the roots of a frost-bitten pine. Oil stain, cigarette butt, still dry. That meant recent. Back at the cabin, the radio finally crackled to life after days of silence. Ryan Briggs. Loud as ever, calling in for access permits. He'd come back. Jack stood motionless in his doorway, hands still hovering near the receiver. He didn't respond. Ryan had always been a brute in nice boots. Charming when it suited him, cruel when it didn't. A man who believed everything had a price. Land, life, secrets. Jack knew men like that. They were the kind who wore antlers as trophies, but never sat long enough in the woods to hear what the trees actually said. That week, the signs spread fast. Ground blinds near salt licks. Motion-triggered calls rigged to mimic the cry of wounded elk. Jack found one speaker nailed behind a maple tree, playing a looped distress sound, high-pitched and fake, like a lie wearing camouflage. His stomach twisted. That wasn't hunting. That was luring. Targeting something not fooled by bait, but compelled by empathy. He ripped the speaker down, smashed it with the butt of his flashlight, buried the pieces in snow. But by the next morning, there were 3 more. That same day, on the ridge near Deer Hollow, he found the remains of another trap. This one crushed like it had been stomped by something not interested in subtlety. He examined the mangled steel, then turned toward the trees. There, carved into a poplar, was a new mark, a shape, one long vertical line, then two angled curves branching from it, almost like an arrow pointing down. It hadn't been made with a knife. The cuts were too wide, too deep. Something had pressed into that tree with strength, not steel. A warning, a message, a presence. Later that night, the wind screamed like something torn loose from the hills. Jack couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the orange flicker catching the silver in his hair, the furrow in his brow. He felt watched again, but not by the forest. By them, humans. He stepped outside, shotgun slung behind his back, just in case. The air bit at his throat. He scanned the tree line. That's when he saw it. A single deer, a buck, limping. But it wasn't alone. Something had tended to it. Sap sealed the wound. Bundled moss strapped around the hind leg, tied with braided twine. Not human work, not quite. Too careful, too elegant. The deer paused, looked at him, then turned and disappeared into the dark like it trusted he'd understand. Jack did. They were learning, watching him, mimicking him. The forest wasn't just reacting anymore. It was adapting. He found himself gripping the strap of his pack tighter. Evelyn had once told him, "The forest doesn't just grow trees. It grows memory, and it knows how to survive." She'd been mocked for that in town, laughed off, labeled a dreamer. But now, Jack wasn't so sure. Later that week, Ryan's voice boomed again over the radio. Static popped behind each word like a warning shot. "Hey, Rutherford, you seen anything big? Real big?" Jack didn't respond. But he already knew. Ryan had seen it, or part of it. The next day, he hiked north, deeper than he usually went. Past the marker trees, past the broken stream bridge. That's where he found the prints. Partial, but unmistakable. Not the flat stamp of a boot, not paw. Something heavier, wider, with ridged pressure near the arch. He knelt, ran his glove along the edge, still fresh. Then he found the camera trap. Plastic, covered in mesh netting, hidden in the crook of a fur. He opened the casing, pulled the film cartridge. Burnt smell, tampered. Still, one frame remained, blurred, but the shape was there. A massive silhouette, caught mid-stride, a single eye reflecting back through the lens, and behind it, a smaller figure, shorter, head tilted. Jack exhaled. It was the pair, the one from the fog weeks ago, the Watchers. He knew then. Ryan wasn't out to prove the legend. He was out to weaponize it, frame it, claim it, or worse, bring it down. That night, Jack returned to his cabin and pulled Evelyn's old field journal from the top shelf. Leather-bound, worn soft. She'd kept everything. Sketches, field notes, pressed leaves. On the final page, in faint pencil strokes, was a line. "If they're still watching, that means they haven't given up on us yet." Beneath it a drawing, a ring of trees, and inside, a pair of eyes. Wide, gentle, curious. He flipped the page, and there, tucked between the folds, a feather. Coarse, curved. Not from any bird Jack knew. The same kind left on his porch weeks ago. She had known. She had seen them first. He felt something crack inside. Not pain, but release. The line between what she believed and what he had seen. It was gone now. The truth was older than either of them, and it was walking these woods. At dawn, Jack packed a new bag. Took only what he needed. Matches, field knife, Evelyn's journal, and a lantern. The air smelled different now, like snow was coming. The wind carried with it a message he hadn't heard since the night he pulled that creature from the lake. A single knock, then two, then silence. The war had already begun, and it didn't need bullets. It needed choices, the kind you couldn't undo. The melt came slowly that year. Not in a rush, but in fits and whispers. One afternoon, the snow cracked and slid off rooftops in wide, wet sheets. The next morning, everything froze again. The land caught between seasons, not ready to let go of what had buried it. Jack Rutherford watched the ice recede from the edge of Crystal Lake, one creaking inch at a time, like the water underneath was remembering how to breathe. He'd stopped logging official reports. The forest had changed him too deeply to reduce it to forms and dates. The radio calls went unanswered. Ryan's voice still buzzed across the static once a week, sometimes bitter, sometimes taunting. Jack no longer cared. The cabin was quieter now, not with loneliness, with choice. That morning, a letter arrived, dropped at the ranger station and delivered by hand from the district supervisor. No envelope, just an internal memo clipped to a single photo. A grainy, zoomed-in frame of the same blurred silhouette Jack had burned weeks ago. Except this time, it was clearer. The massive back, the taper of hair at the shoulder blades, the faint outline of a face half-turned. Below the image, a scribbled note in red pen. "You knew." Jack folded the paper slowly. The next line was even clearer. "Either you come forward, or we do." He placed it on the stovetop and lit a match. The flame caught fast. He didn't look away as the image curled and blackened and turned to ash. It was done. There would be no negotiation. Not with men like Ryan. Not with a system that only believed in things it could capture, label, or sell. The next move would come soon. He knew it. But before it did, Jack had a promise to keep. That night, he followed no trail. Just instinct. Feet crunching over brittle frost, breath fogging in the dark. He passed the marker tree, the one with the triple claw symbol, past the broken game trail, past the hollow where the young one had mimicked him weeks ago. The forest was still, but not empty. He knew they were watching. Then the silence parted. A sound, low, deliberate, moved through the pines. Not words, not a challenge. A call. From the dark, the figure stepped forward. No rush, no fear. 8 feet of muscle and memory, standing in full view of a man who no longer flinched. The Bigfoot's breath steamed in the cold air. The eyes locked onto Jack's like a question being asked for the second time. This time, Jack answered. He stepped forward and dropped his pack, pulled off his glove, placed one hand to his chest, then extended the other, palm up. The creature lowered its head slightly, then moved closer. Massive hand lifted, fingers calloused like stone. It touched Jack's chest, the same spot where his hand had rested. Not a push, not a press, just connection. For a long moment, neither moved. And then the creature stepped back, reached into the fur at its side, and pulled something out. A small, round disc of wood. Smooth, burnished. Carved with a ring of unfamiliar symbols, like language folded into itself. It placed the disc into Jack's hand, curling his fingers around it, like sealing a deal. Jack nodded once. He had chosen. They had accepted. He returned to the cabin with the token in his pocket and fire in his lungs. That night, he didn't sleep. He opened the cedar trunk in the corner of the bedroom, the one Evelyn had sealed before she died. He'd never had the heart to go through it. Now he opened it slowly. Inside, her field gear, her old ranger patch, a small leather pouch of herbs, brittle with time, and her journal. Not the one she'd left behind for him. A different one. He thumbed through it. Notes, drawings, symbols, pages describing sightings, patterns in the moss. Broken snares, reset and marked with small stones. She had seen them. Years before him, she'd known. But the final page stopped him cold. A sketch, not of the forest, not of the creatures, of an eye. Round, deep, gentle, and beneath it, the same carved symbol from the token in his pocket. He turned the page. A sentence, barely legible. I didn't imagine them. I just saw them before anyone else did. The paper trembled in his hands. He laid the journal beside the fire and stared into the flame. Not to burn it, to remember. That morning, before the sun rose, he returned to the tree near the cabin, the one Evelyn used to sit under with her sketchbook. He dug carefully beneath its roots, removing a small box he had buried there years ago. Inside was a Polaroid of the two of them. Jack, younger, shy smile. Evelyn, laughing with her eyes closed, her head tilted back into the wind. He placed the wooden token inside the box, then buried it again, not as a secret, as a vow. Later that week, a hunter from town claimed he'd heard howls in the East Ridge. Said something had stolen his bait, bent the steel trap like it was tin foil. He asked Jack if the wolves were back. Jack smiled without answering. Then the storm came, wind sharp enough to crack branches mid-air, snow flurries riding sideways. Jack moved through the woods like the forest had rewired his muscles. He found the old trails covered, but he knew the way now. He found the cave where the stone ring had once been laid. Inside, no fire, just warmth. A presence. The Bigfoot was waiting. Not alone. Beside it, the smaller one. The young one. Jack stepped inside without hesitation. They didn't speak, just sat. The young one watched him with wide eyes, then crept forward. Small hands touching the token Jack had worn around his neck now, tied with leather cord. The larger creature let out a low, resonant hum. Not a warning. An offering. Jack closed his eyes. He wasn't just accepted. He was trusted. And in that dark, in that warmth, in that shared silence between what should never have known each other, a new kind of promise was sealed. Not with words, but with presence. He wasn't a ranger anymore. He was something else now, something the forest had chosen to remember. The wind that swept through the mountains in early March wasn't the kind that danced through trees. It howled. It tore at branches and peeled back the edge of winter like it was stripping bark off a wounded trunk. The forest wasn't quiet anymore. It whispered in warning. Birds took flight too early. Elk retreated deeper than they should have. Jack Rutherford had lived long enough under these trees to know when something unnatural entered the food chain. Not by hunger, but by intent. At first, it was just noise. Helicopter blades somewhere beyond the North Ridge. Then came the tire tracks again, wider this time, gouging through frozen mud near Hollow Basin, land that was marked unmapped on most official ranger logs. The kind of place Jack had learned to leave alone. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was sacred. He moved faster than he had in months, pack loaded, rifle slung, not to be used but not left behind. He followed the trail north past Granite Hollow, then east, where the trees grew thinner and the ground sloped into a basin carved centuries ago by ice and grief. It was the kind of place you didn't shout in, the kind of place that listened. Then he smelled it. Gun oil, burnt diesel, and beneath it, the metallic edge of something manufactured but poorly hidden. He crouched beside a fallen log and spotted them. 4 men in dark green gear, crouched near a series of camouflaged traps. Not old snares or baited cages. These were heavier, wired, laced with trigger lines and high-tension nets. Their eyes swept the tree line, not in curiosity, but calculation. One of them, Ryan. He hadn't changed. Still moved like he owned whatever his boots touched. But this time, he wasn't just hunting shadows. He was trying to erase them. Jack's hands curled into fists inside his gloves. He waited until they moved downslope, then crept forward. In the soft dirt beside one of the traps, he found prints. Fresh. Not boots, not paw. Something between. Smaller than the last. And beside it, a broken piece of carved wood. A pendant. He picked it up, ran his thumb along the edge. A ring of symbols, barely visible. Then he saw it. A single line that curved upward into a crescent. The same design he'd found in Evelyn's journal. This one had been strung with leather, worn down where it must have hung against fur or skin. His chest tightened. He knew then they'd taken one of them. The young one? He moved fast, not thinking, only knowing. The basin had no official trails. But the forest had paths of its own, carved by centuries, remembered in silence. He followed the broken branches, the heavy drag marks. And then, deep in a pocket of the woods, so quiet it made his breath sound wrong, he heard it, whimpering, low, guttural. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. But it was close enough to both to break something in him. He found the young one bound to a tree, arms above its head, ankles shackled with wire strung to a spring mechanism designed for torque. Its fur was matted with mud, eyes swollen, blinking slow. But when it saw him, Jack, it didn't flinch. It let out a sound like breath through cracked stone. And then, impossibly, it tilted its head. Recognition. Around its neck, a crude collar made of bent copper and twine. In the center, etched into the band, was something that made Jack stagger back. His name, J. Rutherford, scratched by hand. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He pulled out his knife, cut the wires, broke the shackles with a crowbar he'd packed 3 winters ago and never used. The creature collapsed into his arms, lighter than it looked. Its breath against his neck was warm and slow. Then he heard the click. He turned. One of Ryan's men, rifle raised, eyes wide. "Drop it!" he shouted. Jack didn't. He stepped sideways, planted himself between the barrel and the body in his arms. The kid didn't fire. He hesitated. Just long enough. Jack kicked the trap reset lever behind him. A net flew up between them. He turned, ran. Branches slashed his face. Roots caught his boots. He held the young one against his chest like a child, like a promise, like a dying flame that wouldn't go out on his watch. The wind howled louder now. The forest screamed back. Somewhere above, something moved, something heavy. Jack didn't look. He reached the ravine and ducked behind a ridge. Then the ground shook. Footsteps. Massive. The air thickened. He turned. The father. Not running, not roaring, walking. One arm wrapped in torn fabric, blood trailing down to its knuckles. The other arm, missing. Jack's breath caught. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The look in the creature's eyes said it all. He had given it up. To get his child back, they met without words. The giant took the young one from Jack's arms and held it close, a low rumble echoing through his chest. Then he turned, looked back toward the sound of men crashing through brush, and stood between them and his child. Ryan appeared next, rifle drawn. He froze, not from fear, from confusion. Then rage. "You knew," he growled. "All this time, you were helping them." Jack stepped beside the creature, hands raised. "You've seen what they are," Jack said quietly. "You've seen they're not a threat." Ryan lifted the rifle. "Doesn't matter." And for a breathless second, everything held still. Then the wind shifted. The snow fell harder. A shot rang out. But the aim was off. The round hit the rocks beside them, echoed. Ryan's eyes widened. His stance broke. From behind him, a shout, someone calling his name. The cliff edge gave. Ryan slipped, tumbled, fell. Silence. Jack didn't move. The creature didn't move. The young one pressed its face into its father's chest. The storm swallowed them. And by the time the others arrived, nothing remained but snow, footprints, and the silence of a war no one would admit had ever been fought. But Jack knew. He had broken the order, defied the chain, burned the rule book, not out of rebellion, out of love, for something older than laws, truer than names. And when he returned to the cabin that night, soaked, bloodied, half frozen, he didn't light a fire. He simply sat in the dark and waited. Because the forest had changed, and what had once hidden in the shadows was beginning to step forward. The sky broke open before midnight. Lightning split the hills with the violence of a war cry, thunder crawling over the valley like something with claws. Wind tore through the trees, bending trunks that had stood for centuries. Rain lashed against the cabin's tin roof like it wanted to drown out memory. Jack Rutherford stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, coat already soaked, eyes fixed on the black wall of storm swallowing the ridgeline. He didn't need a radio to know something was wrong. The signs had come slowly, then all at once. The prints, the silence, the absence of the young one's voice. For days the forest had refused to speak. No calls, no knocks, not even the usual breath of birds at dawn. Jack knew what that meant. Something had shifted again. Something had broken the pattern. He stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a shove, but his body moved with purpose, not hesitation. The pendant still hung under his shirt, its leather cord warm against his chest despite the cold. Every footstep felt heavier now, not from fear, but urgency. The kind of urgency that came when you knew someone had hurt what should never have been touched. He passed the broken cedar where he'd once left offerings, past the glade where Evelyn's carving had been taken. The world blurred under sheets of water, but his direction never faltered. He moved like the trees were whispering again, this time only to him. Then, gunfire. Distant, short burst. He stopped, listened. Another shot, closer, then shouting. He veered east, cutting through underbrush slick with rain. Branches slapped his face. Roots grabbed at his boots. The storm masked his approach, gave him cover. Ahead, half glimpsed through the dark, a camp, makeshift. A tarp strung between two trees, crates, equipment, tripods and sensors, and in the center, movement. The young one, trapped again, tied to a metal frame, its arms bound, legs kicked weakly, breath ragged. Wounds new, not healing, eyes unfocused, a muzzle of wire wrapped cruel across its mouth. Jack's breath caught, but he didn't hesitate. He crouched low, moved around the perimeter, counted the men. 3 now, 1 asleep, 1 tending a fire, shotgun slung but unready. The 3rd, guarding. He waited for thunder, let it mask his step, closed the distance. The first cut was clean. Wire sliced through, wet metal snapping back. The young one stirred. Eyes blinked. Focused. Recognition. But before he could free the legs, the guard turned. Flashlight. "Hey!" Jack rose, flashlight beam catching the glint of rain on his blade. Then, movement behind them. Not Jack. The creature. The father. He hit the camp like a wave. No roar. No scream. Just impact. One arm still bound, the other gone. Blood soaked what was left. His body took the first bullet without flinching, then the second. He crashed into the man with the shotgun, throwing him into a crate with enough force to split wood. Another tried to run. Didn't get far. Jack grabbed the young one and ducked behind the tarp. Cut the last binding. The creature fell against him, weak but alive. Then he turned. The father staggered now, chest heaving, blood pouring freely, one eye swollen shut. Jack stepped toward him. Then Ryan, emerging from the trees, rifle in hand. "You never learn," he hissed. His face was twisted, not with hate, but something worse. Certainty. "You think this makes you righteous?" He lifted the gun. The father turned. Ryan aimed. And in that final second, something in him wavered. A memory, not the forest, not the creature. His mother. Jack had never met her, but he saw it in Ryan's face. The flicker, the crack, the shot fired. But it missed. The bullet struck the dirt beside Jack's foot. Ryan flinched. Then the earth gave. Loose soil, rain-slick roots. Ryan slipped, tumbled backward into the ravine behind the camp. Silence. Jack stood frozen. The young one groaned beside him. He turned, helped it to its feet. The father approached, slow now, kneeling, breath shallow. He extended his remaining arm, placed it gently on Jack's shoulder, then leaned forward and pressed his forehead to the young one's. A moment. Then he dropped, collapsed into the mud, body shaking. Jack stepped forward, hands out. But the creature pushed him back, eyes locked on his, not fear, sacrifice. Jack understood. The creature crawled forward, toward the trap, the metal cage they had built, its one good arm wrapped around the base. Then, with every last ounce of strength, it pulled. Steel groaned. The frame twisted, then collapsed. The storm screamed again. When it ended, the camp was silent. Jack stood in the rain, holding the young one upright, his own legs trembling. Behind him, the father lay still, body curled around the broken cage like a shield. The wind died down. The trees stopped swaying. For the first time in hours, there was no sound, no threat. Just two figures, soaked and bleeding, standing in the wreckage of a war that no one else would ever acknowledge. Jack didn't speak. He helped the young one walk, step by step, into the trees. By the time they reached the ridgeline, the sun had begun to rise. A thin gold sliver cut through the clouds, and for a brief, sacred moment, the forest held its breath. The trees had grown louder in their stillness. 1 year passed, and the forest no longer whispered warnings or echoed storms. It breathed. It carried memory through its leaves and ran old songs through its rivers. Spring had melted into summer now, and what once felt secret had become part of the land itself. Like the truth had found a way to root down deep, beneath the moss, beneath the bones, beneath the stories no one dared say out loud. Jack Rutherford no longer wore his ranger patch. The uniform had been folded, set in a drawer, and left there like a skin that no longer fit. No retirement party, no ceremony. Just a quiet walk back to his cabin, and the knowledge that the forest didn't require rank to recognize loyalty. He still walked the ridgelines, still checked the trails, but he did it now without a badge, without expectation, with eyes sharper than ever and knees that barely ached anymore. Some mornings he swore he could smell things before they arrived. Change, movement, rain, and other things with footprints soft as fog and breath that hummed low just beyond human hearing. People in town noticed, but said little. That was the way it went. They'd seen too much or not enough. They gave him space. But the children didn't look away. He'd wake sometimes to find a handful of wildflowers left at the edge of his porch. A pine cone carved with careful lines, a smooth stone wrapped in dried grass. No names, no explanations, just quiet offerings. And he always left something in return. A feather, a berry, a piece of twine shaped into a circle. The trades were never acknowledged. That made them sacred. One morning, just after the lake thawed clear and still as glass, he heard footsteps coming up the path. Not rushed, not heavy, just steady. When he stepped outside, she was already halfway to the porch. She couldn't have been older than 23. Brown hair pulled back, boots worn from real use, a notepad tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as Tessa Monroe. Said her grandfather had worked fire lines with Jack in the late 60s. Said she'd heard things about the woods, about disappearances, about something too old to be legend but too sacred to be proven. She asked if the stories were true. Jack didn't answer at first. He watched her eyes, watched how they didn't blink when he said nothing. She didn't push, just sat on the step beside him, listening to the wind move through the pines. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wooden ring, the same one the father had pressed into his palm all those seasons ago. Still warm somehow, the symbols worn smooth by time, but still legible. Still waiting. He placed it in her hand. "You don't chase what belongs to the woods," he said quietly. "You wait. If it wants to speak, it will." She nodded. No awe, no thrill, just understanding. He pointed toward the trees. "Listen long enough and you'll hear them." She didn't ask who. She just looked toward the timberline and whispered, "I already have." She left at sundown, said she'd be back. Jack didn't promise to be there, but something in his bones told him the forest would remember her name. The next morning he packed a small satchel, bread, dried berries, the old compass, and Evelyn's journal. He didn't lock the door, just let it close behind him. The trail to Crystal Lake hadn't changed, but his footsteps had. He didn't rush. Let the air tell him where it wanted him to stop. When he reached the lake, the sky was just turning gold. The water shimmered without a ripple. Jack stood at the same spot where he'd once pulled a dying creature from the depths and given it a rope instead of a bullet. Now he waited. From the trees, a figure stepped out, taller, broader, no longer uncertain in its stance. The young one, now grown, it walked slowly toward the water's edge, then stopped, watching him. Jack didn't move. The creature lifted something from its side. A slab of cedar, worn, carved by hand or claw, with a scene etched deep into the grain. On the left, a human figure, tall, bearded, one hand outstretched. On the right, a massive figure, arms wide, eyes carved with astonishing precision. And between them, a tree. Not just any tree. Jack recognized the shape. The one that had grown behind Evelyn's grave. The one that leaned west as if listening. He stepped forward, took the carving in his hands. When he looked up again, the creature was gone. He didn't chase. He sat at the lake's edge, the carving in his lap, the wind pushing gentle ripples toward his boots. He stayed there long past dusk. Later that year, the children stopped seeing him in town. Some said he'd moved south. Others said he'd finally gone to live with family out east. A few, the oldest ones, just smiled when asked. Said he'd gone home. But one morning, just as the first summer storm passed, someone noticed something on his porch, a wooden pendant, a ring of symbols, and beside it, a small cedar slab. On it, a figure carved carefully, a man stepping into a tree, and beneath it, a single line etched into the grain. He belongs to the forest now. The ranger station didn't issue a report. There was no body, no grave. But those who knew, the ones who'd seen the gifts, the signs, the shadows that moved like stories not yet told, they understood. Some things aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to be remembered. And when the wind changes just right, and the pines lean into each other like old friends sharing secrets, you can still hear it. The sound of footsteps on soft ground. The rustle of leaves that carry names long forgotten by men, but never by trees. Because kindness never fades in the wild, and the forest remembers. There are places in this world where time does not tick like it does in cities. Places where the wind carries memory instead of dust, and every leaf that falls carries the weight of a promise once made and never forgotten. In such places, kindness is not a word. It's a currency, passed silently from one soul to another, sometimes without a single word spoken. It's what echoes after footsteps have faded. It's what roots itself deep in the soil, long after we're gone. Sometimes what we think is lost isn't gone at all. It's waiting, quietly, patiently, for someone who knows how to listen, for someone who understands that not all truths can be proven, and not all guardians wear a badge or walk on 2 feet. That there is a kind of strength in silence, and a kind of love in watching over another without ever being seen. We live in a world that often demands noise and spectacle to believe in something. But out there, beyond the edges of maps, are truths that exist only because someone chose not to destroy them, because someone chose to protect instead of conquer, to give instead of take, to trust, even when there was no reason to. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the most powerful stories live. Not in headlines or awards, but in the quiet acts of compassion that ripple through generations. A hand extended, a vow kept, a shelter offered when no one was watching. In those moments, something bigger than us is restored, because in the end, the wild doesn't forget. Not kindness, not sacrifice, not love. And if you listen closely, on a still morning or in the hush of a storm, you might just feel it too, that you were never alone, that something ancient, something good, remembers. If this story moved you in any way, if it reminded you of something you've always believed but never said out loud, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or simply share one word that stayed with you after the story ended. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you're not just joining a growing community. You're helping us continue to tell stories that honor the unseen, the unheard, and the unforgettable. Thank you for walking this path with us. The forest remembers, and so do we.